The rain-slick pavement outside Lincoln Heights Middle School glistened like dark glass as the last bell rang on a cold October afternoon. Inside the echoing hallways a hush clung to the air that did not match the usual chaos of dismissal. Whispers traveled from locker to locker like a secret current. Everyone knew something was about to unfold in the music room. A teacher known for sharp eyes and sharper words had set her sights on one boy, and today she intended to prove a cruel point. She thought the stage was hers. She thought humiliation would teach a lesson. But behind those quiet brown eyes the boy carried a fire and a gift that no prejudice could smother. The room would soon discover a truth that would change the story of the entire school. Lincoln Heights Middle School stood at the edge of a sleepy town that tried to appear progressive but often revealed its cracks beneath the surface. The red brick building with its proud white columns dated back to the early 1950s when segregation had only just begun to crumble. Generations of families still spoke in low tones about the first black students who dared to cross those steps. Decades later the corridors were painted bright with murals and motivational posters, yet old attitudes lingered like dust caught in corners. In classroom 2B sat 12-year-old Marcus Hall. He was quiet in a way that invited assumptions. Teachers called him polite but distant. Students labeled him smart but strange. Marcus did not fight the descriptions. He let them settle while he focused on the one place where he felt entirely alive, the worn upright piano in the school music room. Marcus had learned to play from his grandmother, who once toured with a small jazz quartet during the 1970s. Her stories of smoky clubs and late-night improvisations filled his earliest memories. From the moment his fingers first pressed ivory keys, he sensed music was more than notes. It was a language older than words, capable of carrying sorrow, joy, and everything between. Every afternoon Marcus stayed behind after classes to practice. He played scales until the janitor swept past. He lost himself in melodies while rain tapped against high windows. He played with a precision and passion far beyond his years, but only a handful of people knew. Among the faculty, Mrs. Evelyn Crane, the music teacher, had noticed him early. At first she offered polite encouragement, but it did not last. Evelyn Crane carried herself like a conductor of old symphonies, with a stern chin and a taste for order. She believed classical music belonged to those who understood its heritage, a heritage she defined narrowly. When Marcus played with jazz inflections or improvised on Beethoven, she corrected him with a clipped tone. She called his style careless. She told other teachers he lacked discipline. Her irritation deepened when Marcus outperformed her favorite students in local competitions. He won a regional Young Musicians Award without formal training. He performed a complex Chopin etude from memory and received a standing ovation. Parents whispered with admiration. Some of Evelyn Crane's longtime protégés did not even place. Instead of celebrating his talent, she began to look for ways to diminish it. Small remarks slipped into her lessons. She questioned whether he practiced enough. She suggested his success came from natural rhythm rather than hard work, a phrase heavy with old stereotypes. Marcus heard the barbs but kept silent. Rumors of her prejudice spread quietly. Some students avoided the subject while others repeated her subtle digs. Marcus's closest friends urged him to complain, but he shook his head. He believed music would speak louder than arguments. Then came the announcement of the annual Fall Arts Assembly. Each year the school showcased talent from drama, poetry, dance, and music. Students auditioned weeks in advance. Marcus planned to perform an original composition dedicated to his grandmother. But when audition schedules were posted, his name was missing. He approached Mrs. Crane after class with the sign-up sheet in hand. She barely glanced up from her desk and told him the roster was full. Yet several slots remained blank. The slight was clear. Marcus walked out without a word. The incident reached the principal, but nothing changed. Administration valued Mrs. Crane's long service and brushed aside complaints as misunderstandings. Marcus continued to practice alone, determined not to let bitterness steal his love of the piano. Days later, an unexpected announcement crackled through the intercom. Mrs. Crane called the entire 8th grade to the auditorium for an impromptu music demonstration. She claimed it was a lesson in classical performance and voluntold Marcus to be the centerpiece. Word spread fast. Students sensed something more than a simple class was about to happen. The auditorium smelled of dust and floor polish. Rows of folding chairs faced the small stage where a single grand piano gleamed beneath overhead lights. Marcus entered with cautious steps. He wore his everyday sneakers and a plain sweatshirt that felt suddenly inadequate beneath the collective gaze of 200 peers. Mrs. Crane stood at center stage holding a thin folder of sheet music. Her voice carried through the hall as she announced a spontaneous recital to illustrate the importance of classical discipline. She explained that too many young musicians relied on instinct and showmanship. True mastery, she insisted, demanded obedience to tradition. Her eyes settled on Marcus as she invited him forward. A low ripple of whispers followed him to the piano bench. He sat without speaking while Mrs. Crane placed a copy of a challenging Bach fugue on the stand. She declared that he would play at cold sight, reading every note exactly as written. The challenge was not merely difficult. It was designed to humiliate. The fugue contained complex counterpoint and shifting rhythms that required hours of preparation even for advanced students. Marcus felt a surge of heat in his chest. He knew she wanted him to falter. Silence draped the room. He lifted his hands and began. The opening bar stumbled. His fingers searched for the patterns. A few students chuckled softly. Mrs. Crane folded her arms with a satisfied tilt of the head. Marcus closed his eyes for a breath, then he remembered his grandmother's advice. When the notes blur, listen for the music beneath them. He slowed his breathing and let instinct guide him. What followed surprised everyone, including himself. Marcus transformed the stiff fugue into a living conversation. He navigated each voice with growing confidence, layering lines of melody until they shimmered. The initial hesitation melted into a commanding flow, yet Mrs. Crane was not done. When he finished the last chord, she interrupted the applause and handed him another piece, an atonal 20th century work infamous for jagged rhythms. Again she demanded sight reading. Again he played. Students leaned forward. They expected failure but heard something else. Marcus found patterns hidden in chaos, shaping dissonance into unexpected beauty. The hall filled with a tension that felt almost electric. Frustration flickered across Mrs. Crane's face. She announced the final test. Without giving him time to breathe, she ordered him to improvise on a classical theme but forbade jazz influences. The instruction was a trap meant to strip him of the very style that defined his artistry. Marcus hesitated. He thought of his grandmother and the stories of musicians who fused traditions to create something new. He realized he did not need to obey a narrow rule to prove his worth. He began with the prescribed theme but allowed it to wander. Notes of blues and gospel seeped into the melody. He layered syncopation and unexpected harmonies. The sound grew larger than the room itself. Audience members who had entered out of curiosity now sat spellbound. Even students who rarely cared for music felt something stir. The combination of classical discipline and soulful improvisation defied categories. Minutes stretched as Marcus built the music into a soaring climax. His fingers blurred across the keys. He did not see the crowd. He saw his grandmother smiling in a memory of warm kitchens and late-night practice. When the final chord thundered through the hall, a silence followed so deep it seemed to erase time. Then a wave of applause crashed forward. Students leapt to their feet. Some shouted his name. Mrs. Crane remained still. Her carefully constructed authority wavered as the room celebrated the boy she tried to humiliate. The ovation echoed like a storm. Marcus stayed seated, his chest rising and falling with the last vibrations of sound. He felt a calm unlike anything before. It was not victory over a teacher. It was the pure certainty of purpose. Mrs. Crane stepped forward, her face pale under the stage lights. For a moment she seemed about to speak, then stopped. She glanced at the principal, who had arrived midway through the performance, drawn by the noise. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that the afternoon had shifted beyond anyone's control. The principal approached the microphone. He began to thank Marcus, but the crowd drowned his words with more applause. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Within hours, clips would flood social media. Marcus finally stood and bowed slightly. He wanted to slip away, but students surged forward to congratulate him. Friends who once teased his quiet ways now reached out in awe. Even teachers who rarely acknowledged him offered praise. Through it all, Mrs. Crane remained near the piano, her hands clasped tightly. Her carefully pressed suit looked suddenly stiff and outdated. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered. She muttered something about natural talent and turned toward the exit. The principal called after her, but she kept walking. The students parted like a tide as she left the auditorium. Marcus stayed a moment longer, soaking in the energy of the room. He knew the incident would carry consequences, but for now he felt only the strange, weightless freedom of having played exactly as his heart demanded. News of the performance spread beyond the school before evening. Parents shared videos. Local reporters called for interviews. Musicians from the nearby university sent messages of admiration. The town that once overlooked Marcus now spoke his name with pride. The following week, the school board met to address complaints about Mrs. Crane's conduct. Multiple students described years of subtle bias and discouragement. Though she denied intentional prejudice, the evidence of her public attempt to shame a student was undeniable. She was placed on indefinite leave. Marcus did not celebrate her downfall. He told friends he hoped she would reflect and change. His grandmother reminded him that real triumph lies not in another person's defeat but in staying true to one's gift. Opportunities opened quickly. A community arts foundation offered him a scholarship for advanced piano study. Invitations to perform arrived from neighboring cities. Each time he stepped onto a stage, he carried the memory of that day when music proved stronger than ignorance. The school also changed. Administrators launched new programs to highlight diverse musical traditions. They invited guest artists from jazz, gospel, Latin, and African classical traditions. Students who once saw music class as routine began to explore it as a space of possibility. Marcus remained humble. He continued to practice in the same quiet corner of the music room after classes, often remembering the hush before his first note on that tense afternoon. The piano felt different now, not because of fame, but because he had discovered his own courage. For the classmates who witnessed the event, the memory lingered as a lesson far beyond music. They saw how prejudice can hide behind polite words and how dignity can shine without anger. They understood that talent and perseverance cannot be confined by outdated boundaries. As seasons passed and new students filled the halls, the story of the boy who turned humiliation into harmony became part of school history. Teachers retold it as a reminder that greatness can come from anywhere and that respect is not optional. Marcus himself offered no grand speeches. When asked for advice, he simply said, "Listen to your own music and never let someone else decide its value." And so the echo of that extraordinary performance continued to ripple outward, challenging everyone who heard it to question their assumptions and to recognize the brilliance that bias tries to hide. The auditorium where it happened still stands. Each year during the Fall Arts Assembly, a moment of silence honors not just Marcus, but every student who dares to share their voice. The final question remains for all who hear this story. How many gifts remain undiscovered because someone tried to silence them? What music might fill the world if every young person were allowed to play without fear?